Hey, Leith, how are you?
Hi. Oh, hi, Taylor. How's it going?
It's good. It's
It's
good.
good.
Moving along. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of Zoom meetings.
Lots and lots of Zoom meetings. Lots
Mhm.
of, but it seems to be getting a little bit smoother, I think. A little easier every day. At
Yeah.
least for
I
the
mean,
students.
it's kind of like the air, like it's starting to clear a little bit. It's starting
Yeah.
to get better. It's good.
Yeah.
Um, so today we're talking about helping parents, middle school parents, have those kind of bigger, difficult conversations with their kids, kind of about some of the bigger things that are going on in the world right now.
Yeah. There's a lot going on out there right now.
Mhm.
And I know we're seeing some of it creep into the classes and conversations I'm having with students.
Yeah.
It's certainly in their heads, and I'm sure it's popping up at home.
Yeah.
We have certainly we have the coronavirus issue and all the things that are coming into play with that.
Mhm.
We have a lot of racial issues coming up right now.
Mhm.
With the Black Lives Matter and everything.
Mhm.
Certainly, the political front is coming up now that we're heading in towards the election.
Mhm.
That's certainly popped up. So there's a lot of things going on. You're right, and there are some big conversations that parents might be thinking they need to have right now.
Mhm. I mean, just right off the bat, I can think one of the main things I think of is kind of having a conversation, maybe like a pre-conversation even about media and about where you're getting your information. Because,
Ugh.
I mean, just hearing, kind of bring those things up, I'm like, well, if I watch this channel, they're saying this. And if I watch this channel, they're saying this. And so if parents are watching or getting their news from one source and kids are getting it from a different one, um, that right there is going to be a hurdle.
Right.
So I maybe even just kind of in the beginning outlining, hey, this, where are you getting your information?
Mm-hmm. And
TikTok
it's
and Instagram, like, okay, that's where you're getting it. You're
and
gonna,
maybe starting the conversation with what would be a good source of information and what might be more of a not so great source.
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of great places out there to find those kinds of things, where they have, where they can tell you this is a pretty good place, but they tend to lean one way or another.
Yeah.
Or this one isn't so good because they really just put a lot of opinion out there,
Mhm.
that type of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's to me one of the starts of the conversation is just kind of having some common language and defining some of those terms. So like
Oh,
what does racism mean to you? Oh, okay, it means this. This is what it means to me. And this is what Webster Dictionary says. This is, or this, whatever it is. Um, but just kind of and maybe understanding that the way that a middle schooler sees something or defines something might be slightly different, and that's okay, but let's just put it out there so we're both on the same page.
well, right. And they're going to, one, because they have a different life experience than the parent probably does.
Mhm.
They're coming at it from a different place. And two, I mean, think about middle school. It's the age, right, where you're kind of challenging your parents.
Yeah.
You're challenging them because you want to figure out who you are as an individual, right?
Yeah.
So even though the student might be processing this and your kid might be saying, yeah, maybe not, or that, but they may be hearing everything you're saying, but they may want to just push back on it a little bit because they want to have their own identity.
Yeah.
And it's really important for them to try that. So they're going to try those different hats on. And I know that can be really frustrating for parents sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes me think of a couple things, but yeah, just like those little kindergartners that are, for the first time kind of venturing out on their own, and then they
Right.
kind of look back, like, oh, what's mom gonna do? What's dad gonna do? That's right where middle schoolers are. They're starting to, figure themselves out in that sort of individuation
Mm-hmm.
phase. Um, so they're kind of pushing back. What's dad gonna do if I, you know, he sees something this way, I see it slightly different. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it makes me think too that as adults, we have the capacity to not get hung up on details and not get hung up on like, the real, you know, the trees when we're shooting for the forest, if that makes sense. I
Yeah.
think,
And as opposed to middle schoolers who are very much into the black and white.
yeah,
it's either my way or it's not my way, and they
Yeah.
have a much harder time with that area of gray in between. So I think as parents, it's important to help them see that there might be kind of a variation along the line, as
Yeah.
opposed to either you're right or wrong. There could be something in between.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that parents can't have their basics of what they expect, right? Like be a decent person, treat others with respect and kindness, you know, use a respectful tone when talking about things. You can have your basics, but when it comes to the bigger social issues, these big conversations, like you said, I think it's important that as adults, we actually model the ability to sit back and listen to somebody else.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's important when parents do have those conversations. Parents are caretakers, you know, it could be an aunt, uncle, grandparent.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Grandparent.
but when they have those conversations with their middle schoolers, to maybe in the beginning lay out that common ground, you know, hey, you and I both believe that kindness is a value we both believe in. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we both believe that racism is a horrible thing. You know, so I mean, kind of defining that, like, hey, our values are the same. So that's the important thing. If you see this little offshoot of it differently, that's okay with me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that that gives the adults kind of that platform to go from.
Right. And it gives the kid a place to come from too, right? Because they can say, oh, they actually want to hear what I have to say.
Yeah.
They actually, so maybe I should listen to them because they're listening to me. So maybe there's something to what they're saying as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's something that we do a lot of, and
Yeah.
I think for parents it's, you know, it's hard sometimes, but asking more questions, you know, and doing more listening than talking
Mm-hmm.
is a hard thing sometimes, especially when it's a, you know, the emotions get a little, you know, a little escalated.
You
But
start taking it a little personally.
yeah,
You don't
yeah,
agree with me, you must be rejecting what I believe.
right, right,
Yeah.
right. You know, but is that's the hardest thing, is to kind of separate that, like, okay, I'm not going to take it personally. And you know, you could probably speak to it more. I've never had I don't have kids, but you know, I've had difficult conversations with kids,
Yeah.
where we see things differently, and I definitely have to take that step back and say, okay, this person sees this, you know, this situation very differently than I do, but it's okay, and I need to just sit and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully that part doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm listening to this person.
Right. And I think it's like I always try and, tell parents that sometimes it's better just to sit back and listen and just be in a situation where you're just hearing what's going on, and keeping kind of that face of I'm listening to you, but I'm not really reacting to you,
Mhm.
can really it can really open up some conversations, and it can let you know where your kid is coming from.
Mhm.
Like I said, my favorite thing to do when my kids were teenagers, especially young teenagers, was I was the one that always drove them around with their friends because I wanted to
Yeah,
hear what was going on, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
want to hear what they're saying in the back seat, and they kind of forget that you're the driver sitting there. They just forget you're there because their world's all about them.
yeah,
So you can hear a lot of things, and the hardest thing is to not react to that in the moment, but to just keep your ears open and listen. I think some of these conversations are hard,
mhm,
right?
yeah,
It's kind of like the first time you talk to your kid about sex, and you're
yeah,
kind of like, this is nerve-wracking because it's uncomfortable. You don't know what they're comfortable with, and it's just really awkward, and you don't know what to do. And big things like racism or political beliefs, or what's happening with the president or anything else, it could be really difficult to have these conversations because it's one of those things that we just don't talk about in
yeah,
polite society, right?
yeah,
So, but as adults, we need to do it. Now, maybe, we were talking before and you said something that struck me is maybe it'd be a good thing to rehearse this ahead of time, or maybe like figure out ahead of time kind of how you want to approach this so that you don't stop and go, oh, they threw something at me, I don't know how to respond to this.
yeah.
Right? So figure out what your thoughts are. Can you speak to that more?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think even just like, you know, conversations that we would have, or, you know, especially conversations I have with students, in my mind, it makes sense to plan to be flexible. So I'll go in there with a game plan, but I also know that it's probably going to go some way that I'm not sure. But as long as I have a game plan of like, okay, I'm on this page, I'm going to go from here. And I think for parents, whether you're married, separated, divorced, whatever it is, making sure that you're on the same page at least.
Mhm.
You can be different, you have different points of view for sure, but making sure that you're consistent with like, okay, one parent's thinking this, saying this, the other parent's thinking this, saying this, like we're all in the same, at least in the same chapter.
Right.
You
At
know,
least in the same book, if not the same chapter.
yeah, yeah. And if there is some major differences, acknowledging that and acknowledging that the different point of view doesn't make someone a bad person. Just
Right. And it doesn't make them wrong.
yeah, yeah. That two people can see the same situation and see it two different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of times I'm sure, and you're thinking, I'm sure as parents out there, they're thinking, well, a lot of times these conversations don't come up and I'm not, in a way that I'm prepared for them because they
Yeah.
just come out of something else.
Yeah.
One of my go-tos when, like, if I'm working with a student and we're talking about something and out of left field, I know you've had this happen, something else pops into the conversation and you're like, whoa, wait a second.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of trying to say, how do I respond to this? One of my go-tos, and this could be helpful for parents, is, oh, so where did you hear this?
Yeah.
Or what do you think that means? Or, where did this come up for you? Mm-hmm. And kind of getting a context for yourself so that you can kind of go back in your head and go, okay, so this is why they're asking this question, or this is why they're bringing it up. Mm-hmm. So it's really good to be able to come back and say, oh, well, that's a really interesting thing you just said. Where did you hear that?
Yep, absolutely. And I think, something that I've used with kids too is, looking stuff up together. Mm-hmm. If they ask something and, I think it's totally fine. And in some cases it can actually be a positive thing to say, oh, I don't know that. I don't know that answer. Let's look it up. Let's figure it out, cause in that way you're both kind of on the same level of like, we're both learning here. And you have the same source of information. So I think that's a really great tool for parents to use to kind of like level the playing field a little bit. Like, oh yeah, let's, you've got this crazy view that you're talking about. Let's look this up. Let's check it out.
Yeah. Let's go to the source on this. Let me show you how to do this. Yeah, I think that's really important. I like what you said about kind of putting both parties on the same playing field and leveling it out. Because I think in these conversations, especially with older kids, like in middle school and above, I think it's really important, again, that individuation piece. Mm-hmm. This kind of gives them the power to be able to say, okay, here's where it's no longer parent-kid, it's more we're equals, kind of exploring this together.
Yeah.
And I think it really does help that move into more of we're changing our relationship now a little bit, and let's figure this out. And I think that's a really important developmental piece, mm-hmm. both for parents and for the kids. Is to be able to start seeing things on more of an equal level as opposed to this kind of a level.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I remember last year I dragged my dad to a triathlon, and it was a long drive, and we spent, I think, like 5 or 6 hours driving and talking. And at one point he had just made a kind of a quick comment about how, we were talking about these things and we saw things slightly differently. But it was just a difference in our relationship that now we're at this point where, he sees me as an adult with my own views and, all these kind of things. And it was really cool.
Yeah.
It was really cool to kind of like, oh yeah, no, we both see this political thing slightly differently, but it's awesome. Now we're going to go do a triathlon.
And now we're going to go do a lot of sports stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's, I think being able to develop that, and it will help open up that communication as well, because it gives the child a sense that, oh, okay, they're really going to listen to me. I can come to them with these big things and they're going to listen to what I have to say. If you go in and you just start saying, well, you should think this and this and this, it might shut that door, and you don't want that to happen right then.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, something I jotted down a couple things, but I think one of the important things is knowing that it's these kind of conversations are the start, or they're an part of an ongoing conversation, that it's not a one and done, like, I mean, like this, like the sex talk, it's like, okay, we had it, now there you go.
No.
I don't know. But it's an ongoing thing, as the middle schoolers mature and get new information and, kind of develop their points of view,
Mm-hmm.
that conversation matures along with it. And
Right.
Just like the sex talk, like it matures as the child matures.
Right. And you're going to give them what they need as they need it.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to add in there is sometimes, like I was saying, they'll come at you with something and you're really not expecting it, or you're just not in a place to have that conversation. I think another tool is, it's okay to say in that moment, that's wow. I really want to talk about this. Can you give me an hour or two to think about this? Can we get back together in an hour, or go take a walk or something after dinner and really talk about this? Because if you're in the middle of like preparing dinner or getting, a sibling, settled or something along those lines, you might not have the space to be able to have this conversation. So it's okay to say, I really want to talk about this. Can we do it in a couple hours and we can take a walk? I mean, I wouldn't just sit down and just go face to face, because that's just really weird and awkward. But, come do the dishes with me and let's finish this conversation, or let's go take a walk, or let's take a drive, or whatever it is that would make it easy to get back into that conversation.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And I think, maybe especially for boys, but I think girls too, but I think I can only speak to being a boy. But being able to have a conversation with someone and not have to look directly at them.
Mm-hmm.
So when, I would go for drives with my parents, or, as an adult riding bikes with friends, it's a little bit easier to kind of get into that vulnerable place when you don't have to look directly at them. And
Mm-hmm.
so for parents, maybe it's even making up a reason to go to a store. Hey, I've got to go and get milk later. Do you want to go with me? Come on. We were talking about the thing earlier. Come on, come with me. And then just driving around.
Yeah, but yeah, give yourself the space to be able to do that. It's all right if you put it off because you're a little like, oh, I'm not ready for this yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's fine too.
Mm-hmm. But still have it.
But don't let it go away. Address it as soon as you're able to.
Yeah.
Because if your child is bringing this to you, that means they're thinking about it, and they really do want. Middle schoolers, even though they're pushing you away really hard, you're still the most important person. You still have the most influence on your kids, even during this whole individuation time. Yeah. So they really do want to hear from you and what your thoughts are on this. They're telling you this or asking you this for a reason. Mm-hmm. So, it's up to us as parents and as adults to kind of honor that and say, wow, you really do want to hear what I have to say. So let's have that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I have a question. I don't know. This is probably might be kind of hard, but how did you determine what was age appropriate when you had these conversations with your kids?
I'd say they'll let you know. Mm-hmm. So again, I'd ask a lot of questions like, well, what do you think? And I could gauge it from there. I think for a lot of topics, again, it's just funny. I keep going back to the sex talk thing, but it's a really good example of this, right? Because It's difficult. We always think like, oh, if we give them too much information, it's going to, hurt them in some way, that kind of thing. Kids will take in what they're capable of taking in.
Yeah.
So if you start going down a road of, don't give them too much information, but if you start giving them like a whole lot of something and they're looking at you like they're just not, you can kind of gauge they're just not really taking it in, pull yourself back a little bit and try and ask them, so did I answer your question? Or is there anything else you need to know?
Yeah.
You can kind of see in their faces if they're like, okay, they're done with this conversation, or if they really want to know more. Mm-hmm. And parents are the biggest expert on their own kids, right? So they should be able to do this, but they're not going to take in more. If you're giving them a bunch of stuff and they're just not ready for it, it'll probably just fly right over their heads.
Yeah.
They might come back to it later when they're ready to absorb it and take it in, but in that moment, it'll probably just go right by them. and that's okay.
Yeah.
They'll take in what they're capable of taking in.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, as they mature, they may come back to that and go, oh, so that's what you were talking about. Now I understand it.
Yeah. Very
And
cool.
also remember, kids are listening in all the time. If you're having discussions with your partner or with your friends, or you're on the phone with your mom or dad, and you're having discussions about this, your kids might be over there doing their homework, but they're also listening in. So they're going to pick up things from you in your conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I would think that it's, in most cases, kids know more than we think that they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something else that I use sometimes, and I think parents definitely, but is a combination of acknowledging feelings, but then also using humor in these kind of conversations. And, there are a lot of times where I'll be talking with a middle schooler and things will get kind of heavy, and I can kind of sense that the conversation is going to shut down, and I'll just tell them, I'm like, dude, this is getting kind of awkward, isn't it? And, but just kind of acknowledging something like that,
Mm-hmm.
lightening it a little bit. It's a nice way to just, kind of bring people back in and, make it seem like we were talking about, more on the same level. If we can sit and joke about this, we're on the same level.
Right. We kind of, it's okay. We're in this together. And I know it's hard. It's hard for me too. And yeah, like you said, using humor usually helps a lot. Because it can lighten the mood, but it does place you on the same level, and you're kind of in this together. It creates that bond.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, I think
hope this was helpful.
As always, I think if parents, if you guys have any questions or,
anything you'd like
to
know about.
Yep. Feel free to email us. If you're thinking about having these kind of conversations and, want to just touch base ahead of time, definitely shoot us an email and let us know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or if you have a good conversation, let us know too.
Yeah. We'd love to hear some feedback on it. See, if something works.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye, Taylor.
Bye.